Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1401. Welcome Party. Since we are on the topic, how is the search for a mind reader going? Seth asked the princess. Talking about the gates reminded him of their legendary batteries, currently feeding the guardian tree. The legends caught during the Battle of Delta were still unconsciously getting sucked dry by the tree. They originally intended to get someone read their mind and extract information about Spacia from them, but the blacksmith had not heard anything about it since Lena started working on the task. Well, I have good news for once. I managed to convince an acquaintance from Krina to come for a visit. His name is Absarukt, a very talented seer. He should be able to search their thoughts and memory, Lena said proudly. There were still people in Krina willing to talk with you? Seth asked, surprised. Since the Empire cut ties with Earth, their connection with Krina worlds was completely cut off. If Absarukt really came, they would have to first travel to a place like the Muir Empire to be able to come to Earth. They aren't affiliated with Krina, that's why. I got to know him during a diplomatic mission. He is trustworthy, she assured. It's just that they will only arrive within the coming month, she revealed the drawback of her success. As long as the legends survive until then, I don't mind, the Tower Master said magnanimously. The information was not 1000% critical to their mission, otherwise, they would not have intended to let Drosy go before they mind-bent the legends. Their plans wouldn't change, unless of course, the information would be game-changing, then the plan would obviously change. To change the subject again. How about we hold a joint welcome party for Paolo and Monique the day after tomorrow? Mary suggested. Monique was scheduled to return in 2 days, while Paolo's was a happy surprise. It was a lucky coincidence that they were this close together. Good idea. Let's do that. It will also help everyone release some tension. And Lena will have her chance to convince the others, Seth added. Everyone, except Mike, was supposed to return for the celebration, so the princess would get her chance to talk with them about her idea of making an armor for Cade. Are you really going to make a full set for Cade if Lena managed to convince everyone? Mary asked doubtfully. I will think about it. I would decide after I talked with Cade. Does Cade even know what you are trying to do? Seth asked Lena. The blacksmith had gotten this thought, as the topic would keep popping up in his head over the past week. Lena was about to speak, but she suddenly fell silent. Seth couldn't suppress a snarky smile. She doesn't? You are doing all this, and she doesn't know? What if she doesn't even want the armor? That would be a lot of effort for nothing, the bard teased her. Why would she say no to a legendary armor? It's the best I can do for her, considering all the things she did for us, the princess argued back. I don't know, maybe she will think it is too much? You can't tell me that you didn't notice that she deliberately kept her distance, right? Seth asked her. He had quite some time while forging the armor, to think about the topic. The question of why he was opposed to making a full set for Cade had occupied his mind for a while until he came to this realization. Cade Albright had deliberately never fully joined Mina's march. She never wanted to go up in ranks, become a member of the field teams. Despite knowing of the magic tower, she never once came to visit her room. The most time they spent together was during the evaluation, and even back then, he barely got to know her. She always kept to the background, communicated as little as possible. Seth had never really thought about it, but when he did, he found that Cade tried not to make any deeper relationships. For someone like this, would she be able to accept a gift as great as a full legendary dragon scale set? Such a present would be a burden, and an anchor even. You might actually drive her away with this, the blacksmith gave his verdict. You that, fuck, you are right. When did you become better at reading people than me? The princess finally gave in. I'm not, I just understand her. I was not much different after I lost my parents. Well, not as bad. But I can understand her, Seth gave a short glimpse at his past, but sealed it back up right away. Lena sighed. Maybe you are right. But do you have someone better in mind to receive a full set, with Monique out of the picture? Don't tell me you went to the length of designing the whole armor around the Sky Dragon heart scales and only made a single set of it. You can't tell me you really like the idea of making lots of smaller sets and individual items from it, Lena countered. My next pick would be Azul, the blacksmith suggested. Finn would have also been a choice if there weren't so many specifics to think of, because of her shape-shifting. Ultimately, she and other candidates already had legendary armors and were more fit to receive supplementary items than a complete set. Azul, on the other hand, had no legendary armor so far. The chimera that originally started off as a lightning mage had branched off to also master melee combat after she received the legendary palpitating spear and Sokolov's lightning rod. Her eccentric proportions and number of arms, 4, had put her behind Phaenis and Monique on the list, and she would have originally only received a couple of pieces instead of a full set. Since Monique had opened another path, she was off the list, and Azul should get a full set. Cascading this effect, more people would be getting some pieces of dragon armor. However, since Cade was not part of the field teams, she was not on the list. Seth had only kept her in mind for how well the kind of armor could fit her. But for aforementioned reasons, he was more in favor of cascading the benefits instead of giving Cade the benefits. Would you two please stop already? Lena, you should talk with Cade. If she agrees, you can try to fulfill Seth's demands. Seth, I think you should also have a talk with Cade. Especially since you can empathize with her. Even if it isn't the Sky Dragon set, she did enough to deserve a custom item from our Tower Master. Don't you think so? Mary, once again, suggested an agreeable compromise to end their discussion. Seth had no objections to this. Mary was right, Cade had enough contributions to deserve custom designs, even if it was not a full legendary armor set. Lena also silently nodded. Maybe this was ultimately for the better. What are you waiting for? Go deal with that. I will prepare the party. Mary ended the meeting brusquely. Chapter 1402 Stop Trying. After his meeting with Lena, Seth returned to his quarters first. Lena would be speaking with Cade first, then it would be Seth's turn. Until then, he had nothing really to do. Monique would be back in 2 days. The epic Olympian silver she had requested was already prepared. He didn't want to work on any Sky Dragon armor parts before the topic with Cade was dealt with. So he decided to take a break until he started working on Monique's armor. He intended to laze around a little, watch some movies, and play a game or something. Sitting down on the couch, he turned on the TV again and continued the movie he had just started when Mary and Lena called for him. He lay down and tried to relax, but his mind kept wandering. Something didn't feel right. It felt so silent, despite the TV. He suddenly found the quarters incredibly empty. It had already been a week since the girls left, but Seth was busy with the armor, and when he returned, he would always call them. He didn't have a chance to realize how lonely he suddenly felt without them around. He used to enjoy being alone, but it seemed like that was the past now. Maybe he had subconsciously avoided being alone in the quarters by focusing on his work. Although the girls would briefly return for the welcome party, they would leave again. Only Allison would stay afterward, since she would bring the samples of the Sea of Trees and finish her mission with that. The rest of the team would continue working with the Horned Ones to scout out the potential chasm and supervise the setup of the barrier fence for the pocket closer to Y City. Then he would be alone again. In this moment, he felt not just lonely, but his mind also kept going back to worry about all the new things and the old things threatening them. He was far from being as confident in his solution as he had acted earlier. Seth had thought he would enjoy taking a break, even without the girls, but now he became restless when trying to do nothing and relax. Since this was not working, the blacksmith decided to stop trying. If he couldn't relax doing nothing, he simply had to do something. He turned the TV off and threw the remote to the side. Using the power of the tower, he appeared at the door of Paolo's quarters. He had wanted to talk with the freshly returned angel summoner anyway, so why not do it now? Tower Master, the priest asked, surprised when he opened the door upon Seth's knocking. Just call me Seth, I think I told you that already once before. I heard of your spectacular return and wanted to hear about it from yourself, the bard said with a smile. Of course, it was not just to hear the young man's stories. The blacksmith's thoughts had changed gears and focused on what items Paolo could benefit from in the future. Marco and Paolo were promising oath guards, just like Ortega before he joined the field teams after becoming a chosen. Marco had received the Harbinger of Winter Woes before being sent on an off-world mission together with Paolo. The priest, however, had not received any grand items, apart from his Oathguard loadout, simply because Minas Mar had been lacking in supporter items for the longest time. Now, Nico Booz had become a master and was playing around with making fabrics from Puffle's possibly most potent thread yet. The question was whether Paolo's overall role had changed with his new class and secondary class. Could they treat an angel summoner and marble monk the same as a pure support priest? Oh, of course. Seth. Come in, the young man invited him in. He offered something to drink, which the blacksmith accepted. Who is this guy? Why are you acting so respectfully? Someone asked as a tall, winged woman stepped out from Paolo, as if she emerged from his shadow. Her short, pitch-black hair was a stark contrast to her kind of honey-colored skin. She had sharp, but attractive features and focused the blacksmith with golden eyes. Oh, is this one of the angels I heard about? The blacksmith asked, curious but absolutely unimpressed by the sudden appearance. Her entrance was good, but the bard didn't intend to act impressed because of some magic trick. This is Novia, the dominion I'm primarily contracted with, Paolo introduced her, ignoring Novia's question completely. As a consequence, she bent down, hugging him tightly from behind. Come on, don't ignore me. Shouldn't you at least tell me the name of your boss? She whispered with a soft voice, rubbing her cheek against his. Stop that, and get off of me in front of the tower master. Wasn't it enough that you had to pick a fight with Lady Phaenis? The priest shooed her away. I'm sorry, Seth, he apologized to him. Nothing to worry about. A dominion? That means she's in charge of the angels you summon? Seth asked, based on the little knowledge he had of hierarchy among the creations of a god. Yes, exactly. I'm contracted with her, which gives me power over the angels under her command, Paolo explained readily. This was how their conversation slowly turned to his journey through the pathworks and the power he had managed to discover and develop based on his new class. Seth was quite intrigued by the class of angel summoner. It resembled an elementalist, as well as a necromancer. Like elementals that were summoned, the angels couldn't die by ordinary means, they would only be unsummoned and need time to recover based on the damage. But unlike an elemental, usually named and summoned by rank, each angel was an actual individual that dwelt in a personal pocket dimension of the summoner, which was very much like the power of high-ranking necromancers. So you are a blacksmith? Novia, who has been silent until now, asked with a glint in her eyes when their talk inevitably came to what items Paolo would need in the future. Since he had become something of a saint of a reclusive god, there was no question that he was going to be added to the field teams. Yes, I'm technically in charge of all the in-house productions of Minas Mar, and I'm personally responsible for most of the items of our field teams, the blacksmith explained. Stop it, Novia, Paolo tried to stop her. Then could you equip us too? She suddenly asked excitedly, ignoring his protests. Her face was beaming with anticipation, while Paolo face-palmed. So you can equip items, the blacksmith asked back, his eyes almost as bright as hers. Seth had suspected it to be possible. Similarly, many of Evie's undead were equipped with armor they usually possessed from the time before they became undead. But she had also equipped quite a few of her mainstays with armor from Minas Mar's vault. There were also plans to equip Evan's next generation of bred mounts and pets with armor and items, but that was something the other blacksmiths were doing, and Seth was not directly involved in that. The management of that project and the guidance of blacksmiths was mostly left to Tord at this point. Haven't you become strong enough since I started leveling you guys up? Why do you have to bring this up again? Please don't listen to her. She had been going on about equipping them for ages, but there are almost 300 of them. I can't possibly. What's the problem with equipping them? The blacksmith asked unperturbed, only looking forward to being able to add another reliable force to their arsenal. Especially since they were able to detect even disguised demons. But with this many, Paolo stammered. Chapter 1403 Not Phased. Seth was not phased at all by the number. Minas Mar had a massive turnover of gear and armor sets. Just the re-equipping of the orc golems he had created after his trip to Kazdam, with refitted armors of spacious soldier, had flooded their vault with a mountain of random armor pieces. However, he didn't intend to just open their coffers and give these angels free choice of armor. Although they were contracted to Paolo, they still served their god, not the angel summoner. He couldn't trust them with armor they could just run off with. It's okay, we should have enough oath sets to equip them, Seth estimated. Any member of the Oath Guard was a strictly selected person, judged on many factors. Each of them was equipped with an oath set, and many were allowed to live in Minas Mar, the tower, not the district. People who were judged this trustworthy were rare, so the overall size of the Oath Guard was only growing slowly. Compared to that, the players equipped with relic-rated armor sets, in variations fit to their class, and free access to the Adventurer Guild's Holy Land were outgrowing their armor at a quick pace. After all, the oath part of the armor blocked it from being an even better armor than it was. People switched to better sets and items once they had the means to. At this point, there were 3,000 oath guards across Minas Mar, and about 500 had switched to better gear taken from the guild vault, or custom gear made by Minas Mar's host of blacksmiths like Whedon or Tord. This meant there were roughly 500 ownerless oath sets sitting in their storage, waiting for new owners. And the new owner had just arrived. You want to give them oath sets, Tao Seth? Isn't that a little much? I'm sure common or uncommon stuff would be. Paolo tried to speak up again, but he was interrupted by the struggling Novia. Oath sets? Novia exclaimed, curious, resisting Paolo's attempt to push her back and unsummon her. What are they? Are they good? She spat out, as the priest started wrangling her. After all he heard, he found her speaking surprisingly respectfully to him. Was it because she wanted something from the blacksmith, or was it the beating she received from Phaenis? Seth had heard that she had mangled her quite badly, but no wounds could be seen anymore. Paolo was still a superb healer. He ignored the healer's struggle with his summon, as the summon wanted the same as him. They are relic-rated armor sets, although their performance is a little lacking compared to their rating. It's the standard armor for the guild's personal troops, and they come in a few variations to fit different combat specializations, he simply explained to the angel, who was finally subdued by the priest pressing her on the ground. However, she didn't seem to dislike being under Paolo like that. That sounds good, but what does relic-rated mean? Is that better than rare or unique? She asked. It's a small step above epic, which is the next rating above rare. It depends on the unique item, whether the oath armor is better than it or not, the Tower Master readily explained. Seth, please stop encouraging her. I can't accept such a big gift, Paolo gasped, trying to hold her down. Despite what he said, he also didn't seem to dislike Novia. At least not as much as he liked to pretend to. Who said anything about a gift? You are giving those back when you start equipping them with your own money. These are only lent out, the blacksmith said with a snort. No matter how much money accumulated on his own or Minas Mar's account, he wasn't going to just gift away items like this. Oh, yes. That makes more sense, Paolo said, a little embarrassed. Haha, just acknowledge it, now that you know they aren't a gift, you are disappointed. You were totally going to accept it. You should be more honest with your feelings, Novia mocked him from below. Ugh, just stop it. Will you? You are getting what you have been pestering me about all this time, just be happy in silence, the priest told her and let go. He was unable to resist this topic from beginning to end, since it was technically decided now, there was no need to keep her grounded. He left her on the floor and flopped back on his own seat. As for your armor, Seth said with a chuckle, seeing Paolo grimace again. It was fun seeing him struggle with the sudden influx of an expensive present. I think you should talk with Nico. Although your class has changed, you still seem better off wearing fabric or light armor. I may make you a staff or accessories later on, when any material crops up, the blacksmith gave his verdict. Since Nico was experimenting with a support-focused fabric, he was the better choice for a comprehensive loadout, even when it would probably end up looking a little eccentric. It was a shame that Seth couldn't help him immediately, but items to help healers and priests and quite hard to get. Not only were they rare, but they were also sought after. You should show the thing to him. Now is the time, the angel suddenly said. Actually, Seth, could I request you to make me a pair of gloves with this? He asked hesitantly and brought out a crystal from his inventory, showing it to the blacksmith on his flat hand. It was a clear, rose-colored gem. Impact quartz oozing divine power, crafting material. Special. Impact quartz that was recklessly injected with a great amount of unclaimed divine power. Enhances physical damage. Enhances the power of divine skills. Converts physical force into mana. The blacksmith almost subconsciously appraised the gem that was suddenly shoved under his nose. Paolo was actually wandering around with a special item tucked in his pocket, though a weird one. Seth knew about impact quartz. It was a peculiar gem that could enhance and absorb physical impacts. Seth had actually looked into these kinds of gems, thinking of Finn's equipment, however, the original impact quartz was only uncommon, and the effects were not worth chasing. He had tested it, and the effect on a finished item was a rise in the power of a fist strike by 10%, while recovering 20 mana. But this one was not the normal one. The description clearly stated that it was recklessly injected with a great amount of unclaimed divine power, which was an interesting way to formulate it. Although he could imagine what unclaimed divine power was, it was questionable how something like that could even exist. No matter what, the gem raised his curiosity. The uncommon version was not worth mentioning, but this one was blessed so much that it went from uncommon straight to special. How much would the effect have improved with this kind of upgrade? Interesting, and you want a pair of gloves? Because you are also a monk? So you want gloves for punching, right? The blacksmith quickly made the connection. His class of marble monk, which he gained during his journey to the Cloud Continent, was the reason he was even able to wrestle his angel to the ground. It was also the reason he suggested seeing Nico, since it was a class in armorless and light armor fighting. Interesting, where did you get this? Seth asked, curious. Paolo suddenly looked uncomfortable, while Novia had a cheeky smile on her face. I would rather not say, the young man said, hiding his face by looking straight at the ground. I mean, you don't have to. I will make you gloves from this when I have time. Do you want to keep it until then, or are you leaving it with me? The blacksmith asked. Please take it, Paolo said, still hiding his face but audibly relieved that his request was accepted. Thanks, then you can look forward to your gloves. I will definitely finish them before we set off to the continent. Set off to the continent? Paolo suddenly asked, surprised, and looked up. Right, you were gone for a while. Did nobody brief you? The mission you and Marco worked hard for will start soon. We will get our people back, at least the ones who wish to return. We also intend to establish our presence on the Cloud Continent and regulate the influx of their powers, the blacksmith described roughly. Looks like I missed a lot. Paolo said solemnly. It was obvious that he had a hard time grasping the extent of things that happened and the plans they had made. I guess I have some time, how about I bring you up to date? Seth said with a smile. It was still early when he visited Paolo, but it became late afternoon by the time he finally left the man alone with his thoughts. Also alone with his own thoughts, Seth's steps took him in the direction of the workshops. There was something else he had wanted to try for a while. It had nothing to do with anyone or the situation, it was purely an idea he wished to follow, since he was currently free. Chapter 1404 Skull Shield. One thing that Seth had kept in the back of his mind was the wealth of dragon materials of Tidus, the Sky Dragon. Although not all of them were legendary, all the materials Al-Zalsar brought back were at least relics. It always gnawed on him in the back of his mind that the most they could do with them was to use them like any other relic-rated material and make a relic-rated item out of them. Seth didn't have the point to upgrade them, but he also didn't want them to collect dust until he reached legendary status. He could have used a legendary enchantment to push past the hurdle, but that just wasn't it. He felt like materials this special deserved better. It sparked when he created the hide of the false god. An item created with the synergy of his trait. Dragons or dragon-like beasts were neither rare nor common in Olympian mythology. Sometimes they were an evil menace, but often they were shown as protectors or serving a god, or both. Python was a good example, originally protecting a place of oracles and serving Hera. And like Python, many dragons died in the performance of their duty. His trait Olympian myths had a strong connection to Hades, a slightly lesser one to Hephaestus, a moderate one to Persephone, and a slight one to Apollo and Eos. These gave him a chance to create items either connected to their myths or their domains. Previous successes to trigger the trait, Python for example, made him believe that items could also gain connections to anything that famously died and ended up in Hades, thanks to his connection to Hades and, more recently, Persephone. His thought process was simple. Since he had a small abundance of dragon material, it seemed natural to try and create items based on those, to get a trait synergy. That way, even if they were not directly legends, they would be very special items. And there was another itch he wanted to scratch. Despite forging items with magical powers, Seth had rarely created something that was visually striking someone as being impossible to create without magic. For that, Seth had brought out the skull of Tidus, the dark blue sky dragon, and placed it in his wide hangar. The skull was huge, big enough to swallow a man-whole. Funny enough, it was smaller than Python's was, but size didn't really matter when it came to legend. Still, it would do the trick. Tord and Whedon had already played around with the relic-rated bones, so he knew their effects. The item made from the bones had a high durability and magic defense. The material possessed a 30% impact absorption effect and 20% magic absorption. The bones were a great material for armor, or in this case, a shield. Seth intended to turn the massive skull into a kite shield. Like the horn of the rhino of destruction, the skull was too big to be worked on the anvil. Fortunately, he didn't need the forge for this one, Karen's obel was enough. Before he began, he placed the teeth to the side for later. It was sad for the others who had looked forward to experimenting with dragon teeth, but the blacksmith would need half of them later on. The others would have to deal with it, that they only had 25 of the upper jaw to play with. Then it was time to start. Ounce, to the side, started playing his tune as the blacksmith's voice echoed in the hangar. The song was one he had rarely used. The first and last time was when he created the jewelry for Jonah. It was the ballad of the animal well that could turn any object into a container for mana or life force. This way, the shield would make effective use of its magic absorption. His hammer in hand, he started circulating his mana and striking the skull. The energy infusing into the porous bone structure softened the material and made it more malleable with every strike. Soon, the blacksmith was able to start shaping the skull. With his strikes, he not only shaped the bones like red-hot metal, but he also condensed them, turning them more solid. Under the influences of the hammer strikes, as well as reinforcement and the refining properties of Karen's obel, the skulls started shrinking, becoming stronger and firmer in the process. Seth was not picky with his methods. What he didn't need was cut away instead of wasting time on refining it. The parts he didn't need were put aside for the others, in case they needed something like a dragon Rami. Inspired by his idea, he sang and struck, slowly and evenly reducing its size, as well as flattening it. In the next couple of hours day turned to night, and the massive dragon skull had taken the shape and size of a great kite shield that could cover a grown man. Things went smoothly, exactly as the blacksmith had hoped. The only disturbance was the sudden call when he was in the middle of forging. He belatedly realized how late it had gotten and that he had even distracted himself from the regular call with Mina and Finn. Despite being bothered and distracted, he managed to finish the base shield successfully. When he could finally put the hammer aside, he hurriedly brought out his communication orb to call them back. However, nobody answered for a while. "Seth? Didn't you say you were going to take a break until we come back?" Mina's sleepy voice answered the call. She didn't even have to ask whether he was crafting until late at night, she simply knew. "Sorry, I had to distract myself. It's getting lonely without you here," he admitted with a tired voice. Forging the skull like this had taken most of his energy. "Same, I miss you, too. I talked with Finn, and we are considering dropping out of the mission and just staying home after the welcome party," the cat girl revealed their intention, making his heart race. Hearing that they intended to stay back made him happy, but... "Is that really what you want?" the blacksmith asked. The two had really looked forward to getting back on a mission. Although he would be happy, he didn't want them to come thinking they were missing out on something. "We wanted to go on a mission to raise our level of existence, but all we did so far was sit and move around this damp forest and fight some mob once in a while when we are bored enough. We barely even get to test our new item," Mina listed her complaints, calming his worries. "Honestly, I'm glad you are getting out of that forest," Seth said with some relief. They talked a little while longer about the past day and what they would do after the party. Seth told her about Paolo and his potential powers, as well as his own project. He started to distract himself. They talked until they were both too tired to keep going and ended the call. The tired blacksmith finally appeared in his quarters and fell asleep on the bed, without even the chance to change his clothes. Chapter 1405 Massive Underbite. Seth started the next day much more motivated, as he looked forward to Mina and Finn returning for good and not just temporarily. Despite not sleeping for long, he returned to work with a refreshed mind. Now the size of a big kite shield, it was much easier to handle, although it was still quite weighty. Seth had cut away some pieces, but the shield didn't weigh much less than the original skull. Fortunately, Titus was a dragon optimized for flying, so their bones were lightweight, making the shield just 120 kilograms after condensing them. This would have been way too much for an ordinary person, but it was usable for people with strength builds in the early to late Leave 90s. Seth also didn't really have a problem wielding it or carrying it around. From the front, the shield now looked like a miniaturized dragon skull from above, because it was exactly that. However, the dragon had a massive underbite, as Seth had used the lower jaw to create the rim of the shield, framing the sides and lower tip of the kite shield. It looked a little funny, but the blacksmith pursued a specific effect in an attempt to get an Olympian synergy. "It's up to you now," he told Run and handed the enchanter golem the shield. "That's right," Seth was not going to enchant the shield himself, but left it to run. The reason was pretty simple, he didn't have an engraving or ballad that could do exactly what he wanted. The golem, on the other hand, did not just learn various enchantments, but could also come up with his own, given he had the needed knowledge. Leaving the shield to someone else, Seth turned to the dragon teeth. While Run would enchant the shield, Seth was going to enchant the 25 dragon teeth that would be set into the loch or rim of the shield. Onto the set of teeth, he engraved one of the enchantments he may have known best, the improved invention of Forge Brand. Seth turned each of the teeth into what he liked to call golem seeds, but he didn't end there. This was the perfect chance to finally use the soul of the martial artists of the voracious Cloud Continent, which he had collected on several occasions in the past. Equipped with the generic automaton ego he had learned from the Chosen of Hephaestus, the golem seed would be able to generate smart, obedient golems from surrounding materials, with the dragon tooth as their core. Doing so 25 times took a long time, considering neither of the circuits was simple. Maybe I can help. Sivri offered friendly, having finished a piece of jewelry for one of the oath guards. The blacksmith's trance disrupted, he looked in her face in confusion for a moment. He had been completely focused on the teeth and needed a moment to reboot. Oh, right, you could help me. Could you engrave the teeth while I forge and enchant the souls? He asked thankfully. He had finished a fifth of the teeth so far. At this rate, it would have needed until late evening to finish, so Sivri's help came in handy. All right, count on me, the golden dwarf said confidently. Sivri and Cerberus both have the same level in enchantment as him. That one was a blacksmith, and the other a goldsmith, had no greater meaning when it came to engraving. The shield is finished so far, Run said as he joined them in the workshop. He was carrying the dragon skull shield in his hands. It was around noon now, and the two were also about to finish the teeth. Seth just had to finish enchanting the last soul. Already, the blacksmith asked, surprised. Usually, arcane enchantments took a while because the preparations and rituals were often needed. He was sure he and Sivri would finish before him. Yes, force propulsion is not that complicated to enchant. I also added featherweight to make it a little more handy, the genius enchanter said humbly. However, I will need the teeth for the last part of the project, he added, looking at the pile of finished teeth beside the blacksmith. Give me some more time, I will be done soon, the blacksmith said, prompting the golem to wait beside them, while Seth engraved the automaton circuit into the soul of a cultivator, which he had previously forged into the shape of a dragon tooth. Slightly less than half an hour later, Run was able to take the teeth and the shield to assemble the item and finish enchanting the shield. While Run was away, Seth didn't just wait either. He continued forging the next soul needed for the item. The shield was not just to see how hard it was to trigger the synergy, but also to see whether arcane enchantment and soul infusion could get in the way of each other. As for the soul Seth had gotten from Tunomol this time, it was actually nothing special. Soul of a flame serpent, rare, medium, crafting material. Flame serpents usually live in extremely hot, subterranean environments. Using their low fire affection, they cover themselves in fire to look bigger, earning them the title of fake elementals. High fire affinity, fire breath. This time, its rating and size were not as important as the nature of the souls and its powers. It was all part of the plan. While Run was busy finishing the enchantment on the shield, Seth turned the soul into a perfect soul copy of the shield, or at least as good as he could from memory. Here, I finished casting retrieval on it, Run returned after roughly half an hour, returning the shield to Seth. Before infusing the soul, he reworked the soul armament again, now that he had the original beside it. The last step was enchanting the soul. The enchantment he had chosen for this was the Minor Olympian Fire enchantment, belonging to the minor enchantments he had unlocked with Master Level 2. At this point, it should have been quite obvious to any observer that Seth was aiming for a synergy concerning the Colchian dragon, the beast that used to protect the Golden Fleece. It was slain by Jason, and its teeth were later planted in a field plowed by the fire-breathing bulls made by Hephaestus. Later, mighty warriors grew from the teeth of the dragon. Many things used on the shield tried to emulate parts of the myth. The dragon skull. Dragon teeth that could be shot from the shield and grow into golems. The fire breath skill of the flame serpent and the minor Olympian fire are reminiscent of the fire-breathing bulls that plowed the field, and with a certain semblance to a fire-breathing dragon. With his connection to Hephaestus, Hades, and Persephone, he thought it possible. Good, let's see how this goes, Seth said, curious, and began infusing the soul into the shield. It went smoothly like always, at least during the process of infusion. There was no problem with the interaction of the soul and the shapeless enchantment bound to the shield. Once the soul found its home, it was time for the shield to be reborn in the waters of Styx. The skull-shaped shield rose into the sphere of water, slowly turning around its own axis, and then Seth heard the announcements. Ding! You have created a unique item. Ding1 A synergy of powers has changed the effects of your item. Ding! A synergy between a trait and the item has changed its effects. Yes. It was exactly what Seth had been looking forward to. A shield connecting to the Colchian Sparty sounded so cool. He couldn't wait to see what was up. GRADED? What in the world? Chapter 1406 Fire Dragon Shield. Fire Dragon Shield. Unique. Physical DEF, 3000. Mag, Def, 3500. Durability 6300. 125% magic absorption. 235% impact absorption. 325% fire affection. 4 Olympian flame. 5 feather weight. 6 life force and mana can be directly stored in the shield. 7 active skill, dragon breath. 8 active skill, flame guards. Although originally not the skull of a fire dragon, this shield has unlocked its primeval nature. It was created by Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth, using various mysterious means. The user of this shield would very well be fit to be called a ruler of fire. Once rumors of the item spread, it has a high chance of becoming a legend. Requirements: 150 strength. This was not what Seth was expecting. He had wanted to get something related to Dragon Tooth Warriors, but instead he got this. He was disappointed at first, as his plans had failed miserably. However, when he started checking out the powers of the shield, he found there was no reason for disappointment. Obviously, the shield featured the expected magic defense, magic absorption, and impact absorption he had expected after hearing about it from the others. Everything was slightly strengthened thanks to his composer of fusion. On this note, impact absorption was something like the lower version of damage negation. The difference was that impact absorption did not get completely rid of damage, but turned a percentage of it into damage over time, where every hit was judged as a new attack. This way damage suffered was lowered and diverted. It only became a problem in case there were many attacks, stacking the dot of the absorption. Still, considering someone like a tank or a warrior carried the shield, the 35% impact absorption was not much worse than nullification, as their defense, health regeneration, and their potential allies could keep up with the dot. The next effect gave him an inkling as to what trait had synergized with the shield. It had to be his kin of fire trait. There was no other explanation for the shield granting the wielder 25% fire affection. Although the soul had a low fire affection, that would have improved the wielder's fire affinity at best, not outright granted 25%. This meant that fire elemental attacks would not only not deal any damage, but that 25% of the potential attack would be healing the wielder instead. Olympian Flame was definitely the higher version of Minor Olympian Fire. This one had also interacted with his trait. The effect granted 200% additional fire damage, as well as a protective flame cloak that could set close enemies on fire and incinerate attacks. 6 was the effect of his ballad. The shield would be able to absorb the damage from spells and, apparently, the overhealing from fire affection, to be used later on to either heal the wielder or power skills. Lastly, there were 2 skills. The first was Dragon Breath, which was probably a synergy between the dragon materials, the soul's skill, and his trait. It quite literally allowed the wielder to shoot a column of dragon fire from the shield. The last skill was the embodiment of Seth's and Run's effort to create a Colchian shield. Flame guards allowed the user to shoot the dragon teeth as a projectile. In the same breath, they were supposed to grow into golems and fight alongside the user when they hit the ground. Forgebrown's original enchantment allowed the golem to be formed from any nearby material. This had changed with the overall nature of the shield. The beings created from the golem seeds were now called Flame Guard. When Seth tested it, he found that they resembled the magma spirits Seth had met some time ago. They were half made of fire, while the other half was the molten materials they pulled from the surroundings. They definitely looked more impressive than ordinary golems. After the deployment, the user also had the option to call them back, automatically reloading the shield with dragon teeth that could be shot again. Seth had not planned for such a hot and offensive shield, but he immediately knew who he would give it to. After receiving White Hilt, Edward had developed his skills and class further into the usage of fire in battle. Not only would the shield max out his capabilities as a tank, but also aid and vastly improve his offensive capabilities. The shield and swords combination were an almost demonic combination. Edward would become a menace comparable to Jess. Putting the shield in his inventory, he decided to give it to Edward tomorrow when they came for the party. Although it was a shame he couldn't get Dragon Tooth warriors, he didn't feel unsatisfied. He had learned something very valuable. He couldn't just force a synergy with a specific trait. On the other hand, this was the first time his kin of fire trait had reacted to create a synergy. The item was good and was actually the first with a high chance of becoming a legend. The shield was done, but the day was young. Sitting at the workbench, the blacksmith thought of what to do next, when he remembered what Paolo handed to him the other day. He brought out the rose-colored gem the size of his fist and looked at it, lost in thought. Impact Quartz oozing divine power. Impact Quartz was a fascinating mineral, improving the power of physical attack and turning the force of an impact into mana recovery. If the effect and return weren't so weak, it would have been a broken material. But who was to say it would be the same for the special variant of it? His curiosity was already piqued when Paolo gave it to him, but he had wanted to make the shield first. Now, making the shield went quicker than expected, and he had some time. The mean priest with a knack for pummeling angels wanted a pair of power fists. Whoever he was going to fist with them was Paolo's business, but Seth was intrigued by the idea of how powerful a doped version of Impact Quartz would be. After all, why not? Why shouldn't he squeeze in a pair of gauntlets? Ounce and Gliobum sounded, playing a fun, upbeat tune. This was not a demonic ballad. Touch my ale and it's time for fighting. Gliobum gave a quick play. Beat you black and blue fast as lightning, the blacksmith such with a smile on his face. It was a dwarven ballad. Promptly, the rose-colored stone found itself on the cold, hard surface of the anvil, threatened by the relentless strikes of the hammer. Impact Quartz or not, it couldn't resist the magical powers of the master blacksmith, aided by Karen's obel. It's a funny tavern brawl with a funky tavern troll. Throwing stuff up and throwing it down. It's chaotic fisticuffs, accompanied by pain and laughs. From slipping on the puke, to a hitting with the jug. Despite all its resistance, the pitiful stone was completely flattened. Chunks turned into sheets, stone turned into armor, the music added a deeper golden sheen, like a good ale, to the rose-colored stone. It's time for fighting. Drink and slap with expert timing. Beer's gone fast as lightning. They fought with scratching a biting. In fact, it was a little bit frightening. In time, the formerly rough gem became a set of armor plates that could already be recognized as a short fighting glove, even without being assembled with a glove as the base. When the blacksmith was happy with the individual plates, the song finally came to an end. The final plates formed a gauntlet that would cover the hand down to the wrist, once assembled. For the enchantment, he had a special idea. It was inspired by the item he had seen during his vacation in Spring City. Since he could leave that to run now, all he had to do was to sew a glove. Nah. It was evening now, he would put the plates aside and end it for today. He would put up an order for one of Nadal's apprentices to make the gloves after the welcome party, then he didn't have to do it himself. Chapter 1407 Welcome back. Most members of Minas Mar were assembled in the magical ballroom of the Wizard Tower. This was no official event, so most people wore leisure clothing. There would be an official ball later on, but that would be just for show. This one was the important party. Let's make this short so we can start drinking. I'm glad most of the teams managed to make it back, more or less successfully. The blacksmith started his toast. The only ones that didn't come back were Mike and his team. Although they could have made it back easily, getting back to the point in the unclaimed mountains afterward would have taken ages. Apart from them, everyone had temporarily or permanently returned for the party, except Marco, who stayed at the Cloud Continent. We welcome back Jane and her party, who have managed to succeed in the diplomatic mission to the Prairian continent. We also welcome back Paolo, who has managed to come back to us after being thrown into the Pathworks. He paused for a moment. And I think those are enough reasons to celebrate today. Let's party, the bard said shortly and officially started the welcome party and quickly joined Finn and Mina on the side. You were thinking of announcing our engagement, right? Mina asked with a teasing smile. No, Seth whispered back in denial. No need denying it, you almost did, Finn said with a chuckle. Okay, but I remembered in time, he defended himself. After all, the three had agreed to announce their triple engagement once Mike returned from his mission. Mina wanted her brother to be present when they re-announced such a huge step in her life. The atmosphere almost made him forget the promise. She simply nodded with a sweet smile before they threw themselves into the evening of drink and dance, forgetting all responsibilities for one night. The party went as parties go. Booze was flowing in rivers, music, dance, and good food did the rest to catapult everyone into a comatose state by the end of the day, and a catatonic stupor of regret or content in the morning after, depending on how much alcohol they had. Still, after some potion support, Seth was on his feet and ready to meet Monique. However, they didn't meet at his workshop. This wasn't about her armor, but a proper mission debrief with her, Jane, and Jonah. Although there had been regular reports, they went over everything the expedition had found out and accomplished on this mission. Among the information they schemed over were the geographical makeup of the foreign continent, the general political climate, and their factions. The whole continent on the other side was governed by the Purican Empire, which held most of the land directly, while also acknowledging several vassal nations. Apart from the national power, there were two more notable factions, the Church of Dawn and the Magic College. Church of Dawn was its official name, but it was also called the Church of Light and similar stereotypical names. What god exactly they served was still unknown. The clerics liked to act as an opposition to secular power, but Monique and the rest found out that they actually had a tacit relationship with the imperial family. It was a similar story for the college, which took an independent stance on the continent, despite being officially under the control of the imperial family. It resembled a ministry with far-reaching rights and specific duties. Their main focus was on developing ways to fight the dungeons and demons. The demons were a power Jane and the others were unable to find out much about. Although they were apparently a huge threat, talks focused more on the dangers of the dungeons than the demons, despite Monique literally being attacked by one. As for their accomplishments, after Jane's meeting with the Emperor and various follow-up meetings with the Prime Ministers and his staff, she had come to a trade agreement that would be able to ease Mina's Mars food shortage while the granaries of Delta and Epsilon were being repaired. They had also made an arrangement to send people to the Magic College to learn about their titans, as they called their mechs and power suits. Although they were more interested in the magic crafting stations that allowed the foreign continent's non-magicians to engineer the massive armors. Jonia Taggart had already set off with a group of technicians from Epsilon and Epsilon, to visit the college. "And what happened to your prisoner when you departed?" Seth asked her after they went over all the basic information. Since the natives didn't talk much about the demons, this would have been the only reliable source. It would have been a shame if the prisoner had been handed over to the church after all, after the trouble they went through. "Oh, we brought it. I thought maybe one of us has a better chance of interrogating it," the chosen of Athena answered nonchalantly. "They let you bring it back, just like that?" Mary asked, also surprised by the sudden revelation. "Not necessarily just like that," Jonah said vaguely. "Someone may or may not have kidnapped the prisoner from their cell and left a different present for them," Monique said with a smirk. Wait. This is the first time I heard about this. You guys kidnapped the demon, brought it with us, without telling anyone?" Jane asked, upset. "This will cause a diplomatic scandal." "What do you think they will do with the diplomats we left behind, with Jonia and the technicians?" the merchant asked, incensed. "Don't worry, we aren't stupid," Monique said with a shrug, unperturbed by the possible consequences. It was pretty clear that she had no interest in giving the foreign nobles and clergy the satisfaction of having outlasted their patience. "We made it look like the demons rescued their friends. Some hypnotism, illusion, some blood magic, it really wasn't that hard. The mask helped a lot. The person currently taking the place of the demon in the cell was the guard standing in front. If they find him, he will tell them about a demonic figure that struck him down," Jonah explained confidently. Talking this much made it seem like he no longer minded the voice change the mask caused. "Well, good thing we are already awaiting a specialist in extracting information. What was their name again, Ibseruct? When they come to look into the legends, we can also have them take a look at the demon," the blacksmith said, not caring about the diplomatic worries. "Fine, at least then we can deny any involvement, since nobody but those two knew," Jane said. She still had some gripes, but realized that there was no point bringing them up now. "Where did you put the demon?" Lena asked for the prisoner's location. "We handed him to some oath guards when we returned. He should be at the holding cells of the embassy," Jonah answered readily. Although the secret extraction of their captive seemed a little rash, they didn't go as far as bringing an unknown, volatile element down into Mina's march. They talked for a while longer to flesh out the details, and when Seth was about to go for a private talk with Monique about her armor, there was one last topic Lena just had to bring up. Jonah, since Monique will be receiving a different armor from the Sky Dragon set, would you mind if Seth made that set for Cade instead? The princess asked, friendly. Although Jonah could be counted as a magic swordsman, the Sky Dragon set actually didn't interest him. The reason was simple, he mostly relied on physical attacks and the blood magic he would weave into the battle, costing his health, not mana. The power of the blood magic was also not fully reliant on his magic power, so the actually unique effect of the Sky Dragon heart scale had little appeal to him. Knowing that his answer was pretty obvious. No really, why do you ask? The vampiric swordsman asked, a little puzzled. On that note, did you already speak with Cade about your plans? The demonic bard asked with a hidden edge in his words. I was going to do so right after this, Lena said defensively. And you, Seth, did you meet Cade yet? Mary asked him, but the blacksmith had a clean conscience. I'm busy, I will talk with her when Lena is done, Seth said with a shrug. Although Cade was supposed to be here, he had not seen her at the party, and going to Gamma to look for her seemed like a waste of time when Lena had not done so first. Anyway, Monique and I have stuff to talk about. Lena should deal with her business first, the blacksmith said and hurriedly left the room, leaving a conflicted Lena and a confused Jonah behind. They still had not explained what that question was about. Chapter 1408 I told her. What was that about? Monique asked, after the two of them appeared at the workshop, using the tower's power of teleportation. Lena had the idea that, since you don't need the custom set, I could use the materials and make one for Cade, instead of making several smaller sets for the other members of the field teams, Seth explained concisely. So I told her, I would think about it if she got everyone who could benefit from more custom pieces to agree. When I brought up my doubts once again in front of Mary, she stipulated that Lena had to ask Cade whether she even wanted the set, to begin with, and then I would have to talk with Cade, to see whether I'm even willing to make one. Before Lena goes to the length of asking everyone for permission, the bard gave her a quick rundown of what happened to lead to the situation. Who would have thought I would kick off this kind of tumult by getting an armor blessed by my divine patron, Monique mumbled. Right, your Sky Mommy really kicked off something, but that's fine considering I'm getting special materials for a whole armor set. Come, sit down, the blacksmith waved off her worries. The two sat down at a workbench at the edge of the workshop. Since we reached that topic, how are we blessing the material? The blacksmith asked. When he created Bones of Seth or Olympian Silver, it included a specific ritual or process. However, when a god blessed a material directly, things could be as easy as the champion or saint simply possessing it. I don't know. I guess you just have to give it to me? I only have the quest to acquire 30 ingots of epic Olympian silver, Monique said, a little clueless. But it was enough to confirm Seth's suspicion that taking possession already sufficed. If it's just that, then follow me, he said, and asked her to get back up after barely sitting down. Monique didn't complain and simply followed the blacksmith as he led her to the workshop vault. This was a place where exclusively the craftsman level and above members were allowed to enter. Here, they stored all the epic rated and above materials that the apprentices were not supposed to put their grubby paws on. At least not whenever they felt like it. Seth had prepared a pallet of Olympian silver refined from mithril. So, I just pick them up. Monique asked for permission. Go for it, the blacksmith said with a shrug. Oh, it's actually working, the quest info is counting up, she informed him, taking one ingot after another. When the 30th ingot went into her inventory, there was a flash of bright light as the quest was concluded and the divine blessing was given as a quest reward. For a moment, Seth imagined the smell of ozone in the air, but it was fleeting and gone quickly. The name in the inventory changed, but I don't really see a difference, Monique said hesitantly and brought out one of the freshly blessed ingots. The blacksmith's eyes instinctively appraised the new material. Compared to the original material, it had gained a golden hue. Silver of Athena Promachos, crafting material. Special. Silver blessed by the power of Athena as goddess of war and strategy, it holds the potential of Athena's domains and signature skills. Ding! You have received the quest Divine Armorer of Athens. Accept Y/N. Quest, Divine Armorer of Athens. You have been offered to create divine armament for the chosen of Athena. Requirement. Full armor set and shield, which includes the Aegis as the central piece. Rewards. Upfront, the blueprint of the Aegis and associated enchantments. Upon completion, medium blessing of Athena. Seth looked at the quest window for a while, but there really was not more to it. A single sentence, no special restrictions, no special design requirements. The finished set only had to integrate the Aegis as a central piece. The blacksmith obviously knew about the Aegis, one of the works of Hephaestus, modified during various myths. Its nature was ambiguous, often described as a shield, a breastplate, or a cloak. When he accepted the quest, would he gain clarity of what it actually was? As he was going to do it anyway and there was only things to gain, there was no reason to refuse the quest. The moment he accepted the quest, he got several notifications, as corresponding knowledge flowed into his head. Ding! You have received the buff Divine Armorer of Athens for the duration of the quest. He had learned the blueprint of the Aegis, as well as the sigil of Olympian Thunder and the combat support automaton ego circuit. His eyes went wide when he realized that these had no caveat. There was no modifier like generic, small, or mediocre with these. But there was one glaring catch with all of them, and it had to do with the buff he received. To use the blueprint of the Aegis, he needed to be Blacksmith, Master, level 5, and for the enchantment, he needed the same level in enchantment, Master. However, Divine Armorer of Athens buffed his skill to the needed level, but only when working with Silver of Athena Promachos. When the quest was over, he needed to reach level 5 in both skills before he could use his rewards, and he couldn't cheese it, since it only worked on the quest material. A little bummed, the blacksmith checked his skill progression. Despite having created quite a few legendary and mind-blowing items, he was still level 3 in both enchantment, Master, and Blacksmith, Master. The former was roughly 3/4s to level 4 while the latter was almost half of the way there. It would take ages to reach level 5 of the Master tier at this rate. Maybe he was going to become a legend before he could create a second Aegis or use any of his rewards at all. Well, at least there was also the blessing he could receive upon success. It would not just strengthen himself, but Seth also had some hope that Athena would be added to his trait, as a potential source of synergies. He would have to read up on her, but he was of the opinion that the more gods there were, the higher his chance of striking a synergy. What's going on? Monique asked when Seth suddenly grimaced. He had just looked at the blueprint of the Aegis and found the big catch of the quest. There was a very specific material the Aegis needed that was not included in what they had here. Monique, we will have to hunt a Gorgon for this, the blacksmith revealed to her. As expected, a proper Aegis needed the head and potentially the leather of an adult Gorgon to be made. The leather was not mandatory, but advised. A Gorgon? Oui. Monique asked, flabbergasted. For her, this came out of nowhere. She also questioned why he had to come along. Yup, need one for the Aegis I agreed to make for the armor, the blacksmith confirmed. And if I want the soul, I have to come along, he added. The two were quiet for a moment, thinking in silence. It could take ages to find one, Monique finally mumbled with a sigh. She had tried to remember whether she had ever heard of one during her travels, but it seemingly wasn't the case. Well, we could ask the Adventurer Guild. Maybe we are lucky and there is some kind of Gorgon dungeon in the abyss, the blacksmith mused. Good idea. Maybe we can also ask Perarian whether they have one. Monique suggested another place with rampant dungeons. Oh, I didn't think of that one. Good idea. We will do this right after we are done here, the blacksmith said, motivated. After we are done? What else is there to do? Don't we need the Gorgon first? Monique blurted out. The Gorgon is only needed for the Aegis. What I need for the rest are just your measurements for now, he said with a smile, pulling the measurement tape that appeared in his hands taut. Chapter 1409 Storage Finds. Seth left the search for a Gorgon to Monique, while he started planning her armor. He already had a design in mind before the sudden change of material, but he had to redo and rethink a lot of the choices he had previously decided on. After taking her measurement and ordering a pair of gloves from Nadal's workshop, he sat down to set up a new blueprint for her armor. Apart from her measurement, which had not changed much during her journey, he could completely scrap the design. At least it was interesting, since he could study the blueprint of the Aegis, which turned out to fit all the legends he had read about it. It was actually an armor automaton created by Hephaestus that was able to change into 3 different modes, depending on the wearer's needs and commands. The standard mode was that of a golden cloak, which could turn into a breastplate or a shield, exhibiting powers unique to the 3 shapes. What stayed the same, no matter the mode, was the protective power it offered the wearer. Seth was fascinated by the modular design of the god of blacksmiths and felt inspired to fulfill the prompt of making an armor set more or less centered around the aegis. It was mostly going to affect the cuirass and shield, while gloves, boots, and cuisses would be less affected. Yes, despite being given a blueprint of a genuine Olympian artifact, Seth had no intention to stray from plate armor. Monique was no immortal goddess, she needed all the protection possible. Where Seth intended to stray from the traditional plate was the helmet. Instead of a knight's helmet, he intended to make a hoplite helmet like the ones Athena used to be depicted with. Overall, he imagined the armor as a mix of a more modern plate armor and Athena's traditional outfit. The change of materials had its advantages and disadvantages. A big advantage was the enchantments that were open to him, as every piece of the armor was going to be made of a type of Olympian silver. The enchanter would be able to directly enchant each of the pieces with the Olympian enchantments. He also wouldn't need to perform energy manipulation when forging the items, since he could soften the Olympian metal with regular fire. A small drawback was that the prepared dragon leather boots and gloves no longer fit the material. The blacksmith had to find a different leather more fitting to the narrative of Athena. Putting the blueprint aside, Seth stood up. Following a sudden idea, the blacksmith appeared in the storage. The one animal mostly associated with Athena was the owl, and he remembered that it had not been so long since they had to deal with giant owl-like beasts. The unclaimed mountains had been marred and gutted by the giant cybernetically enhanced owls that had killed and kidnapped people. If Seth remembered correctly, Mike and the others did bring back some of the materials apart from the energy core, whose technology they had managed to assimilate for golem power like in Hellion. Felith? Hey, Felith? If you are going to man the storage, you should at least use a sobering potion instead of sleeping at the counter, Seth complained jokingly when he found the old man snoring and drooling on the job. What? Oh, Tower Master. Sorry, how can I help you this time? He snapped to attention and quickly asked to perform his duty. Felith, do you remember when Mike and the others returned from the unclaimed mountains some time ago? Didn't they bring some materials from the giant bird they defeated? Do we still have those? He asked vaguely. Give me a moment, Felith said as his eidetic memory kicked into overdrive and he began looking for the documentation of the materials Seth mentioned. Although the blacksmith himself only had a vague memory and asked just to make sure, the appraiser immediately knew what he was talking about. He soon produced a part documenting the storage location. 2 boxes of rare feathers, a handful of epic reinforced feathers, mechanical parts, a bale of leather, reinforced claws. It's still all there. You are lucky, it seems nobody touched it yet, Felith reported. What is the rating of the leather? Seth asked, slightly excited. Epic leather of the giant blizzard owl, probably grants agility, has affinities with ice and storm elements. Is that what you are looking for? Felith asked, reciting the summary of the material's status. Perfect, I'm taking the bale. Just to make sure, we don't have any other leather of owl monster, right? The blacksmith was happy, but had to ask a follow-up question. We have owl wolf leather, shadow owl leather, and spirit owl. No, that's no leather. We have the first 2, he said after checking his registers. Faced with the 3 options he had, he found that the giant blizzard owl leather was actually the best fit to go along with Athena's powers. Although Athena had little to do with the cold, she was known as subduer of winds, while the storm also fit in with the powers of the Aegis. By the way, what was the last one you wanted to name? Interesting. I'm taking that one, too. Once he had decided on the leather to use, he returned to the workshop. Overall, it took Seth a few hours to transfer his original designs and fresh thoughts, and inspirations to a new blueprint once he had the substitute leather. By the time he finished, he heard the ding of an unexpected notification. Ding! Your skill Blueprint Leave 6 has become Blueprint Leave 7. Blueprint, the skill used to make schemata and projections of a piece of work, had actually leveled up after a long time. He had been using it more actively lately, so it was only logical that it had to level up at some point. Especially when he kept making and performing blueprints of legendary sets. However, there are no major improvements, apart from the rise in basic performance. With the blueprint for the armor finished for now, the blacksmith paid a visit to the tailor workshops. He wasn't going to make the boots and gloves himself when he had 2 master tailors at hand. Upon arrival, he intended to look for Nadal, when Nico suddenly appeared before him. How did you know I was experimenting with the threads of light? The tailor asked, his arms crossed. Did you really think you could hide harvesting them from the lich's body? I also saw you testing around when visiting Nadal, he said with a shrug. Why do you suddenly ask? The bard asked. Paolo was here not long ago to talk about a robe for him. He asked about it and told me that you mentioned something about it, Taylor said grumpily. So, why are you so sour? Did something with the new fabric not work out? Seth asked, a little puzzled. It's not that. Tisk, I wanted to surprise everyone with my new, legendary fabrics, he grumbled. Seth pricked his ears. Legendary fabrics? He asked, his interest was piqued. Yes, using the thread of the sun when weaving, I can create legendary fabrics. It was supposed to be a big surprise, but here you go telling everyone about it. Booze complained Moody. I only mentioned something in front of Paolo, the one advertising everything openly like a pitchman is you right now, the bard countered, unimpressed by the tailor's attitude. Booze opened his mouth, but the words got stuck in his throat. Anyway, I have business with Nadal, if you will excuse me, the bard said and slid by the silenced tailor. Chapter 1410 Paolo's Gauntlets. Since Nadal currently had no big projects, he promised to make the boots, gloves, and lining for Monique's armor within the next couple of days, reassuring her that they would stay within the rough schedule for their outing. Tower Master, he heard someone call him when he was about to leave Nadal's workshop. It was one of the tailor's apprentices, or former apprentices. They had all reached the craftsman tier, and it felt wrong to keep calling them apprentices. I finished the gloves you asked for, he said with a bright smile, when Seth stopped to listen to him. It was actually the tailor who took up his order to make the gloves for Paolo's gauntlets. In his hands, the man in his early 30s held a pair of brown gloves. They resembled smooth driver's gloves, ending right at the wrists, but they also had a special padding along the knuckles and fingers, making them also resemble modern fighting gloves used in sports. They matched the blacksmith's specifications exactly. Oh, what leather did you use? Seth asked, appraising the gloves. I used the leather of Quintal Rock Ape, known for their disproportionate punching power, the tailor explained his work at the blacksmith's inquiry. Although there were no options because of any special sewing technique, the gloves actually came with an active skill. Active skill, 1-ton punch, 3000 mana, 15 minutes cooldown. Add 10 times the user's weight as physical damage to the next unarmed attack. Surprisingly, it was one of the more abstract skills Seth had seen, simply because it mixed some very real metrics with the rather arbitrary numbers of the system. There was also no conversion rate mentioned in the skill. There was no telling how good the skill was, even if it said 10 times of something. Still, a free skill was a free skill. It was up to Paolo to find out how useful the skill would actually be. Good work, thank you, the blacksmith paused. Drake, sir. My name is Drake, he said with a smile. Seth couldn't help thinking that it was a waste that someone with such a cool name actually ended up becoming a tailor. But he quickly shooed away the intrusive thought. Good work, Drake, he patted the man's shoulder and took his leave. Seth had almost forgotten about the gloves, but they came just in time. With this, he would be able to finish Paolo's gauntlets before he started on Monique's armor. The day was neither young nor old, so he had a meal and returned to his workshop, where he went to look for the enchanter after greeting Sivri and Cerberus. He found him inside the specially arranged enchantment lab. Hi Run. Are you done with the pieces for the gauntlets? Seth asked, despite already knowing the answer. The genius was currently kneeling on the ground, setting up an enchantment formation. At the center was a simple-looking helmet. Run was experimenting again. Of course. They are on the table over there, the golem said, focused on his task. He pointed at the nearby table, where the crystalline plates were placed. The rose-colored crystal had taken on a violet hue after being enchanted and was glowing with a dim purple now. Great! Did everything work out as expected? Seth asked, picking up the plates. Although it was not a completely assembled item, there were only minor complications with the enchantment, the golem explained, not looking up from his work. Thanks, then I will leave you to your own business, the blacksmith said, understanding, and left the craftsman to his work. While Seth and the rest of Minasmar had been partying, Run had already finished the enchantment of the armor plates. All that was left now was assembling the gauntlets and imbuing a soul to finish the new pair of legendary items. The plates were quickly fused to the pair of new gloves, and Seth could start working on the soul armament. As for the soul, it was another one of those Tinamole had managed to collect during his outing in the unclaimed mountains. Soul of the Hill Giant, rare, big, crafting material. The soul of a hill giant, killed when he was just making himself a new home. Active skill, crude haymaker, trait, brute strength. It was no overly impressive soul, but it had a skill and a trait that could prove beneficial to Paolo. It was the most fitting soul currently available. Haymaker was exactly what the name said, a crude, unarmed swing that would raise physical damage by 75%. In exchange, it would cause a 1-second slow, which left the user open for a counterattack. It was not the best skill, but usable when one knew how. The trait was the main reason Seth ended up deciding on this soul. Brute strength raised one's strength by 25% and their physical damage by 10% when using no weapons or makeshift weapons. Since gauntlets didn't count as weapons, but armor, it meant Paolo would gain this benefit permanently when fighting barehanded. Lastly, once the soul armament was forged, it was time for the enchantment. For this, he had chosen one of the few unique Olympian enchantments he had left. It was called Eurynomus Strike and came in the shape of a sigil that looked like a dark skeleton placed on an eviscerated vulture. From what Seth could find, Eurynomos was a daemon, or a spirit of the underworld. It was described as a terrifying corpse eater, probably in charge of decay, stripping the meat off of the corpses, and technically keeping the place clean. Since Paolo specialized in support and holy magic, while dabbling in pure physical melee combat, Seth thought it was a good idea to add another, meaner element into his attacks, in case Paolo ever met an opponent with a high resistance to holy magic and physical damage. In Seth's opinion, Eurynomus Strike most likely held the power of decay, similar to some of his ballads, but without the demonic inclinations. He never used it since he could either do it with a ballad or had better options. The blacksmith had also deliberated on using Menoitio's destiny, which would have most likely imbued the gauntlets with lightning elemental damage, as Menoitio's was a titan struck down by Zeus' thunderbolt. However, Seth decided against that, because a thunder strike didn't quite seem to fit Paolo's image. A priest who could cause something like decay with his strike, on the other hand, held an interesting duality. As seen in some of his previous works, Seth quite liked pairing these opposites of healer and disease carrier. It had been a while since he inscribed one of these sigils, so it should have been refreshing to watch the engraving cover the two soul gauntlets on its own, once the sigil was finished. But it was more unsettling than satisfying. Instead of a specific, stylized pattern spreading from the sigil, it was like hundreds of flies, emerging from the tight sigil and covering the soul armaments, a tight pattern of flies and maggots. It was not nice to look at, so he hurried to continue. Although he was having some small doubts, it was not enough to stop him at this point. Actually, his curiosity was the deciding factor. He wanted to see how it would come out at this point. Ding! You have created a legendary item. Plus 100p of power of existence x2. Ding! A synergy between the item and your trait, Olympian Myths has changed its effects. Always when he didn't expect it.